In 2025, the president of Nigeria stood inside Saint Lucia's own parliament, and the president of Saint Lucia's Senate told him something most Saint Lucians had never heard officially confirmed before. She read him a number, straight from a 200-year-old British colonial document, in front of cameras, in an official state address. That number is the reason this video exists, and by the time you finish watching, you will understand exactly why a room full of politicians went quiet when they heard it. Saint Lucia has one of the strangest, most fractured colonial histories in the entire Caribbean. It changed hands between France and Britain 14 separate times, more than almost any other island in the region. Each shift bringing a different colonial administration, a different official church, Catholic under the French and Protestant under the British, and a different set of trading connections to the African coast. Because of that constant back and forth, historians have struggled for decades to pin down exactly where Saint Lucia's African ancestry actually comes from. Unlike Jamaica or Barbados, which stayed under one flag for the vast majority of their plantation history, giving researchers one relatively consistent trading network to trace, Saint Lucia's population was shaped by two competing, overlapping colonial systems, layered directly on top of each other, in a way that made a single clean answer feel almost impossible to reach. Then, in 2025, that answer got read out loud in an official government address to the head of state of the very country it pointed to. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that number is, exactly where it came from, and why it made real international headlines the moment it was said out loud in that room. To understand why a number from 1815 ended up anchoring a 2025 presidential address, you need to understand what makes that specific document so unusually valuable. In 1814, Saint Lucia and Trinidad became the first two British colonies anywhere in the Caribbean to begin formal, systematic slave registration, years before most other islands, including Jamaica and Barbados, followed with their own registers. The following year, in 1815, colonial administrators compiled a complete register of every enslaved person living on the island of Saint Lucia, 16,282 people in total, a genuinely massive undertaking for a single small island in the early 19th century. Most of that population, 78%, had already been born in the Americas by that point, listed in the register under the category Creole. But 21%, 3,488 people, were recorded as African-born. And crucially, for the majority of those specific individuals, colonial administrators wrote down something most other Caribbean islands' surviving records simply don't provide with any consistency: a specific documented nationality, a specific African region of origin, entered directly next to each person's name in the register. That level of ethnic detail is genuinely rare in surviving Caribbean slave registers. It's exactly why Saint Lucia's 1815 document has become one of the single most valuable surviving sources for tracing African ancestry anywhere in the English-speaking Caribbean, more granular and more specific than almost anything else that has survived from this period, on almost any neighboring island. Here's what that register actually shows, region by region, among the African-born population whose specific origin was recorded. The single largest group, at 34%, were people the register identified as Igbo, from what is now southeastern Nigeria. The second largest group, at 22%, were people identified simply as Congo, from Central Africa. The third largest group, at 11%, were identified as Moko, a historical label used at the time for people from the border region between what is now Nigeria and Cameroon. Add the Igbo and Moko figures together, since both trace to the same broad Nigerian region, and you get a combined total of 45% of Saint Lucia's entire documented African-born population in 1815, tracing back to a single stretch of the African coast that, at the time, wasn't even organized as one unified nation the way it is today. There's a second, earlier layer to this story that the 1815 snapshot alone doesn't fully capture. Saint Lucia's African population wasn't static across its full colonial history, and it wasn't shaped by just one wave of arrivals. Earlier French period records point to a strong separate Bight of Benin connection as well, tied to GBE-speaking peoples from what is now Benin and Togo, brought to the island during its early sugar expansion, decades before this specific 1815 register was ever compiled. Senegambian arrivals, mainly Wolof and Mandinka peoples, dominated the island's very earliest slave imports in the late 1600s, well before Britain had any lasting presence on Saint Lucia at all. And after the legal transatlantic slave trade formally ended in 1807, an entirely different wave arrived. Yoruba-speaking indentured laborers, coming to Saint Lucia from Nigeria as technically free workers rather than enslaved people, bringing their own religious tradition with them so intact that it survived largely underground, under sustained British and Catholic colonial pressure, in a practice still followed on the island today, known as Kili, complete with the same red and white ceremonial beads associated with Yoruba Shango worship. Which brings us back to 2025, and the moment this entire video is built around. Saint Lucia's Senate President, Alvina Reynolds, welcomed Nigerian President Bola Tinubu into Saint Lucia's own parliament for a joint session, and used that historic occasion to read the 1815 register's numbers directly into the country's own official record. 34% of the island's African-born population traced to Nigeria, another 11% to the Nigeria-Cameroon border region, and 22% to the Congo. She went further, telling Tinubu that most of the island's remaining Creole-born majority, the descendants born later in the Caribbean itself, traced their own forefathers back to Senegambia and Nigeria as well. She described the entire visit as a mission to reunite Saint Lucia with what she directly called its homeland. That's not a claim pulled from a genetics lab, and it's not a documentary narrator's own interpretation added after the fact. That is the sitting president of a nation's own Senate, standing inside her own parliament, citing a 200-year-old British colonial document out loud to the head of state of the exact country it points to, with the moment recorded and reported internationally. Few islands anywhere in this entire series have a piece of supporting evidence with that level of real-world, official diplomatic weight behind it. One honest note, consistent with every single video in this series, the 1815 register only specifically identifies the origin of the African-born population, 21% of the island's total enslaved population that particular year, not the larger Creole majority who had already been born in the Caribbean by that point. Saint Lucia's population also kept shifting well after 1815, through full emancipation in 1834 and the separate wave of Yoruba indentured migration that followed afterward. What the register actually gives us is the clearest, most detailed documented snapshot available for one specific moment in time. Not a complete, unbroken genealogical picture connecting every single Saint Lucian alive today back to one exact ancestor. Senate President Reynolds herself was citing this same register, the same numbers, the same limitations, when she made her own address, not inventing a more precise claim than the document itself actually supports. If watching this made you want to know what a record like this could actually say about your own specific family, that's exactly what our surname and record research service was built for. The link is pinned in the comments below. We go directly into the surviving colonial registers, parish records, and plantation archives for your specific surname, wherever they still exist, whether that's Saint Lucia or any other island we've covered across this entire series. and we tell you honestly what they show, and just as importantly, what they don't. This isn't a general island-wide pattern like the one we just spent the last 10 minutes covering. It's built around your own family's specific name and documented history, researched individually. If Saint Lucia, or any island in this series, is part of your own story, drop your surname and, if you know it, your district or parish in the comments below. It's exactly how past videos in this series got built, and it's exactly how future ones will too. For most Saint Lucians, the general assumption about their island's African roots has stayed genuinely vague for 2 centuries, a loose mix of French and British colonial influence, with no single clear African anchor point most families could point to with any confidence. This video shows that anchor point was sitting in an archive the entire time, detailed enough, specific enough, that a sitting head of government could read it out loud to a foreign president and have it land as real, documented history, not vague folklore or family legend. If you're of Saint Lucian descent, there's a real, specific, documented chance your own family's story runs through Nigeria, through the Igbo people specifically, in greater numbers than any other single African nation recorded on the island's own colonial register, a connection strong enough that your own country's government has already said so, out loud, on the record, to the country itself. We've now covered 6 islands across this series, and Saint Lucia is the first one where a sitting government official has publicly confirmed the exact numbers we're reporting here, on the record, to the head of state of the nation those numbers point to. If you want us to go deeper into the Yoruba indentured migration and the surviving Kili tradition next, tell us in the comments. And if uncovering the real documented history hidden inside the African and Caribbean diaspora matters to you, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel exists to do.